entirely in French. You can also ask the questions in the language of your choice, of course. The session will be recorded and shared afterwards on our GC Collab and GC Wiki pages. And by attending this event, you're consenting to being recorded. All participants will be muted during the presentation portions. Keep your cameras off except when speaking. And we invite you to turn the closed caption function on for the duration of the presentation to enhance the accessibility of the presentation. And now, without further ado, Mr. David Brother Johnson.
Oh, thank you so much, Jasmine. Appreciate it. I wish that I could speak French. I can speak Spanish, but not enough probably to get through this entire session. But anyway, thank you. And thank you to all of you who have taken time out of your days. I know it's getting to the end of the year. It's in the holiday season. And here, more than 100 of you are to spend some time for me to be able to share with you some things that we have learned. My intention with this session is really simple. I want to give you some information and expand your horizons with it. I would like to share with you some things that you likely haven't heard anywhere else unless you've heard me speak about them. And I've been studying employee experience here at Forrester for about 10 years now. And that means a lot of research and a lot of time spent talking to people and learning and listening. The older I get, the more listening I do. And so, if things come to you, if you have questions that you want to raise, feel free to let us know through the chat or raise your hand or something along those lines. And Renee, if I could trouble you or ask either one of you to keep an eye on the questions as they come in, because once I start sharing my slides, I won't be able to see them. So I'd appreciate that. I'm more than happy to answer questions as we go. You might see something that you don't agree with, and that's okay. I'm more than happy to respond and help with understanding or anything else that I can do. But also, what I'm going to share with you today is the most interesting things I have been able to study in my career. It's all about human performance and all about how people experience their organizations and the way things come together to create that experience and what really matters the most. So, hope that's helpful. So without further ado, I will share my screen. So we're going to talk about employee experience. That's what EX stands for. And growth mindset. They're related to each other. And we'll talk a little more about how in some ways that are pretty surprising, I think, for most of us. It were for me when I learned about them. But been studying this area and really heavy on the organizational behavior and psychological research in this for a long time. One of the things about being an analyst and the role of analyst, I'm a former executive. I ran marketing for a German software company for quite a while, but we get to listen a lot. Our clients get to set time on our calendars to ask us questions. It's a half an hour, maybe 45 minutes, or sometimes an hour. And by the time they've waited for 2 or 3 weeks to get on our calendars, they've already exhausted Google. So their questions are usually pretty difficult and pretty well thought out. It also means that we get to have a good understanding of what the edges of people's understanding are. As they're asking us questions, it's our job to give them insights that they didn't have. And so, we always have to try to stay ahead of the curve just a little bit and be able to see around corners just a little bit in order to do that. But it makes for endless learning. I get paid to learn, basically. And to be able to share this with you today is an honor and a gift. So thank you for that. Some of the things that I get from our clients currently, just to kind of give you a sense of the sorts of things that I deal with and questions I work with, is things like, what can we expect from anywhere work in 2023? Or we're getting a lot of people who we think are showing signs of burnout. What are we missing? How can we manage that better? I thought we were doing a pretty good job, but clearly we weren't. How do we get a better handle on how people are doing remotely with productivity and staying engaged? How can we get back more of what we lose and not being face-to-face? What should we be asking our employee surveys? And then what are other organizations doing? What are we missing? I've had the chance to work with a lot of government agencies all over the world as well in this work, U.S. federal government agencies, as well as governments in Europe and European city governments, and also some Canadian government agencies besides Service Canada. So my perspective is informed not just from private sector, but from public sector as well. So what is this? When we talk about employee experience, what do we really mean? Um, you know, if you ask an HR person, they'll give you HR answers. If you ask a customer experience person, they will give you customer experience answers. If you ask a technology person, they will give you technology related answers, right? And they're all valid. They're all perfectly valid. But really, for me, it's the sum of all the perceptions that we have when working inside of our organizations every day. And there are a bunch of things that shape that perception, but that's what we experience. And it's that everyday piece that I want to draw your attention to, because when I ask HR leaders about employee experience and we talk about it, their perspective is usually the life cycle of the employee, right? So, presenting ourselves as a viable, good employer that people want to come and work for, bringing them on board in a really good way, managing them through time, giving them good experiences through time, and then eventually they'll leave the organization one way or another, retire. And that's a perfectly valid perspective. But I argue that maybe 80% of the employees' experience is what they experience every single day. And chief amongst those is, are they able to succeed in what they're being asked to do and in their work, for one? Second is, are they succeeding in their careers? And are they succeeding in their personal lives? Are these things coming together in a way that spells out employee success for them? Everybody, every single person, we make a decision every day, whether we're aware of that decision or not, before we show up to work, as to how much of ourselves we're going to give today. How much of ourselves are we going to devote to giving our full attention to the work that we do and giving the very best of ourselves? And that's a question that we want them to be able to answer with, I want to give the best of what I have today, more often than not. And indeed, organizations who are really good at employee experience have employees making that decision that way more often than not. And so that's just one perspective that I want to share. It's really about success, right? Our success in those three dimensions: our work, our careers, and our personal lives. So keep that in mind as we talk through the rest of this today, that that's really what it's about. And if there's any focus that I could recommend for a employee experience function, it's that. And frankly, the things that govern people's success don't all fit neatly within HR. A lot of them are things like metrics, or just the way that decisions are made, operational decisions are made, or other things. We'll talk a little bit more about what those are that really shape that. But it's a lot of it is stuff that's outside of HR's control, and we need participation from everybody, all the leaders in the organization, to be able to do it well. I had the opportunity to interview some really amazing people in this research over the years. Literally dozens of scientists, hundreds of leaders at organizations that are well known for their employee experience. We asked them a lot of questions about not just what they do differently, but why they do it differently, because the answer is always in the why. How did you arrive at that? I see what you're doing, but why? How did you get there? One of the people that I interviewed was a woman named Colleen Barrett. She was the president of Southwest Airlines here in the US for 30 years. And we had a half an hour set aside to talk on the phone. We ended up being on the phone for 2 hours. She's just this amazing person, this warm, loving kind of soul. And she worked alongside Herb Kelleher, who was the founder and CEO of Southwest Airlines for many, many years, for 30 years as well. And the kinds of things that I learned in talking to her really shaped my perspective in ways that I didn't expect. She saw absolutely no conflict whatsoever between showing people an enormous amount of gratitude and love and support, but also having high expectations for how they show up and how they behave with passengers, customers, and others. And so some really good stuff. But Herb's famous quote here is, if the employees come first and they're happy, a happy employee treats the customer well, the customer's happy, they keep coming back, which pleases the shareholders. It's not one of the enduring green mysteries of all time. It's just the way it works. Now, you might say, well, okay, that's private sector, but what about the public sector? Well, human psychology is everywhere the same. It's like the laws of physics. The way that we respond to a smile or the way that we respond to respect are the same, whether we're working for a private company or for a government agency. And so a lot of the principles of great employee experience are the same. And as a matter of fact, a lot of government agencies have a significant advantage in that you're able to offer people things like defined benefits and other things that people in the private sector don't typically have. So a lot of goodness in working for government agencies. But in any case, this idea of putting people first, and there's profound implications here. Super important. So I want to highlight that. And Southwest is a company that is operating in one of the most competitive industries in the world. They're heavily unionized. They've never had a down quarter. They've had more than 45 years of consecutive profits now. They've never had a layoff. They create a very psychologically safe work environment, but yet people work really hard there because they want to. So there's some secret sauce in that. Some of the science, one of the other people I had the chance to interview is a professor at the Harvard Business School. She's in the process of retiring right now, but her name is Teresa Amabile, Amabile. And what she discovered is that what most of the world thinks we understand about what keeps people engaged at work is wrong. She found that when she would survey managers and ask them to rank in order of importance what really mattered, they'd say things like recognition or paper performance or important work or great colleagues. It's not that those things aren't important. Of course they are. It's just they're not the most important. And she found that managers would consistently rank the most important thing dead last. And that is being able to make progress every single day in work that they know matters, being able to have good days at work, being able to get things done. Ask yourself, how do you want to feel when you leave work every day? Do you want to feel, burned out, or do you want to feel like you made a difference, like you got something done? Chances are it's the latter. When I go out and speak about this in public in front of audiences, I'll ask that question and watch the hands go up. And they always say things like, I want to feel like I made a difference. Yeah, I mean, we're all trading time in our personal lives to be at work and to keep a roof over our head and food on the table. We want to know that time is going to some good. The other thing is that the key to high performance for any of us in our work really comes down to our ability to self-regulate our attention and stay focused on the work that matters most. Now, sometimes you might be working in an environment where that's really hard to do, and we're going to talk about that in a little while. But at the same time, this is really what it comes down to: is how focused can we stay? One of the scientists, well, let me talk about the outcomes here. Those organizations who do this well and have employees who are engaged, they overall generate about 81% higher customer satisfaction, about half the employee turnover. And oh, by the way, for every standard deviation increase you get in employee turnover, you get about a 40% reduction in productivity and about a 28% reduction in profitability. This also holds true in government agencies, not in terms of profit, but in terms of overall outcomes. The outcomes go up when employee experience and engagement improves. These are studies that are really good field studies, 300,000 data points over multiple years. So really, really good studies that showcase this. And I could list off literally dozens of studies that link employee experience to various outcomes, both business as well as public sector. But one thing that I want to acquaint you with is this idea of flow. So the pioneering psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, he passed away in 2021, I believe, or 2020. But he wrote the original book on flow. And what he discovered with it, that was really important, was it's the key to happiness. Um, when you're able to get in the zone, and most of us have had this experience, I'm sure, where maybe we learn to play the guitar, or maybe we do it well, or maybe we have learned to be really productive in some of the things that we do in our work, or sometimes our work fascinates us in such a way that we're just totally captivated by what we're doing, and time seems to fall away. We forget about what's going on time-wise. We might forget to eat, right? Things like that. That's the experience of being in the zone. And so when we can do that and we can reach flow on a regular basis, well, we can be about 127% more productive than people who can't do that well. And again, it kind of goes back to that idea of self-regulating attention. But with that, it's ironic, right? That the harder, not the harder we work, but the better we work and the more effectively we work, the happier we are in general. So I want to leave you with that thought as we go through the rest of this. But that's especially true in knowledge work, which is what you consider to be high complexity. I think that all of you very likely have high complexity jobs as far as this definition goes. Low complexity work might be working in a fish packing house. There were studies that were done in fish packing houses and things like that, where the people who were working there were some who were far more productive than others. And it was their mindset. It was their ability to get in the zone and see every fish as just an opportunity to continue to perfect their craft. And so, it mattered just as much in in a low complexity task driven environment as it did in a knowledge worker environment. So this idea of flow and being in the zone, I also want to leave you with, because we're going to talk about it more when we get to growth mindset a little bit later. Do I have any questions so far? Has anything come up? Renee or S, have you seen anything come in?
Nope, we're good.
Okay. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. So there's a few things that we need to have, and this is good advice if you're a manager. Your people need to have clear goals. What's most important to work on, and the rules of how to work and how to engage need to be pretty discernible for them. And they've got to have the opportunity to have a high degree of concentration on a limited field of attention. That might mean that they might need to bow out of some meetings sometimes, right, to give themselves the focus time they need to get deep work done. They also have to have good feedback. So being able to stay engaged with you and with their colleagues and get feedback on an ongoing basis matters a lot. There has to be a good balance between their skills and abilities and the work that they're doing and the challenges of it. It has to be just a little bit more challenging than they probably have the resources for, which is great. That's what you want. They need to have a sense of personal control over it. And it has to be something that's intrinsically rewarding. And when we say intrinsically, what that means is four things. There's four primary intrinsic motivators. One of them, of course, is autonomy, feeling like we have a lot of control over it, and that we have a say in how the work is going to get done, and we have the opportunity to be creative in how we go about the work. Another is that it's something that feeds our mastery, that we're going to get better at it, and we can get better at this work and better at our skills and our craft as we do it. It also needs to give us a sense of purpose. Like, we need to feel a sense of connection with what we're doing. And I remember doing a workshop for a federal government agency here in the U.S. that regulates banks. So bank auditors that go out to banks and look for problems with the accounting, look for problems with the books, and so on. And I remember asking them during this workshop, why do you do this job? I mean, this seems like it'd be a difficult, time-consuming, and kind of frustrating job. What gets you out of bed to do this? And the answer was unanimous in the room. They said, we're motivated by having a well-functioning banking system that the citizens of the United States can rely on. They were motivated by that. They felt a really strong personal connection with the work that they were doing. And for me, that wouldn't be motivating work, but for them it was. And so they had self-selected into it. And then the third, beyond purpose, is relatedness. We want to feel a sense of building a sense of relationships with other people. We want to be associated with people that we admire and respect. We want to have an opportunity to get to know those people better. So that's another primary intrinsic motivator. There's others, of course, but they're the ones that are the strongest. And when I say intrinsic, I mean motivation that comes from within us. But in reality, instead of being able to reach flow, this is what most of us probably experience. Lots and lots of meetings, lots and lots of interruptions. And so this can really be fatiguing after a while. This is the sort of stuff that creates the contributors to burnout. You work like this day after day, and you never seem to really be able to get in the zone and get things done, and you start to feel it. Yeah. But ideally, if we could have our work environment be such that we could spend all of our time in flow, this is how it would feel, and a lot more value gets created when we can do that. So I encourage the clients that I work with, many of them who are aware of some of these things already, to find those areas that are causing people to have to break away from the deep work that needs to get done. And maybe it's technology friction, maybe it is being interrupted, or maybe it's just the meeting load on their calendars. Be thoughtful about that. Be thoughtful about giving people enough latitude to be able to manage their schedules such that they can find those places to get things done in their schedule and in their work environment, to be able to get deep work done. Any questions about this? Does this resonate with anybody? Also was the lead author on Forrester's Employee Experience Index data set. So I wrote the survey instrument for it. And we fielded my team and I fielded the survey, our data team, to about 15,000 people in the global workforce. And we started with a really good, scientifically validated measure of engagement. And engagement is really clear in terms of what it is. It's three dimensions of vigor, dedication, and absorption, right? That we feel immersed in what we do, we're energized by it, right? We have a lot of energy at work and so on. And then we work backwards to figure out within that entire data set and the range of questions that we asked about, what most strongly predicts engagement. What are the questions that people answer differently than the other questions that really predict engagement well. And we did a pretty advanced analysis technique on it called a Baruda to do that. But the strongest predictor of it was autonomy, feeling like we have the opportunity to have a say in how the work is going to get done. We're not being micromanaged by our boss. So that's a big one. A second is having a manager that does a good job of living the organization's values, that we see harmony between the values of the organization and the way that our manager shows up when in their interactions with us and the way that they work with others. Recent opportunities to advance, clarity about how their work contributes to the organization's success, a belief in the core mission and values of the organization. So in our data set anyway, these were the big ones. Anything more than 25 on this scale is statistically significant. So when we're looking at stuff that's like 78 or 65, they're enormous in terms of their impact on overall engagement. But what we also did with this data set was look at burnout. So we wanted to understand what most strongly predicts burnout. And we started again with a good scientifically validated measure of it and worked backwards. Well, the strongest predictor of burnout, again, more than 25 on the scale is statistically significant. Lack of recognition for hard work or accomplishment. So recognition matters, but not as a primary motivator. It just protects us against burnout, right? So it keeps us being willing to contribute and do the work. My analogy for this, especially with people, so many people working remotely, is if a tree falls in the woods and there's nobody there to hear it, does it make a sound? Well, if you're working really hard, day after day, day in and day out, and nobody seems to notice, how long are you going to do that for before you start to feel like, question, is it really worth it? Is it really worth working this hard? Second is recent organizational changes that affect them have them feeling down. So if they feel like, there's been a recent change that affected them and they felt like they were victimized by it more so than they benefited from it, that can cause them to disengage. And we're not talking just about for a few days or a few weeks, but potentially months or years, right? So these are big ones. And I often get asked the question next, okay, so yeah, we've got some people that I think are suffering from this right now. What should we do? It's a good time for a conversation, right? It's a good time for a conversation. How you doing? What's going on? And lots of taking time to give people gratitude for what they do. People want to feel uniquely seen and valued for who they are, what they bring to the table. That's probably the most important thing any manager can do. Also finding out what's important to them. What is it that's really important to them that they really see themselves wanting to do, wanting to work on, wanting to improve, and giving them opportunities to be able to do that, but also recognizing them for all that they do. Giving them a voice in changes that are going to affect them also. Like, hey, we're thinking about making a change. We're thinking about this. What should we keep in mind? What do you want us to hear before we do that? We're seeing more and more organizations invest in technologies that foster that kind of conversation and dialogue for change. Third is a micromanaging boss in corporate politics. Then devices or applications that break often. This surprised me. Technology shows up on this list as a strong predictor of burnout. So anyway, I want to give you a sense of what this looks like. We can feel burnout as it's happening, although we may not always be aware of it. But it's characterized by feelings of like, I just don't feel as energized at work, right? It's Sunday and I'm thinking about another week in my job and it kind of makes me feel icky, right? I don't want to do it. That's a good cue for self-awareness to maybe make some changes, not necessarily in the job that you do, but in the way that you frame it and the way that you think about it. And we'll get to that a little bit later when we talk about growth mindset. But the outcomes that we see across these groups, if we look at the people who answered in the top 20% on the engagement scale in our survey, we put those in the green high EX category. 96% of them are willing to stay for the next 12 months. 97% say that they feel pretty productive most days and that their organization does a good job of providing a great customer experience. And in the private sector, revenue growth. really correlates well with net promoter score, like recommending a product, the company's products, or recommending a job. They're much more willing to leave a positive Glassdoor review than people who are low on the engagement scale. So it's really worth the time and investment to not only keep people engaged, but also to help people who are feeling disengaged get through it and get back to being re-engaged again with empathy, compassion, and so on. But also, guidance and expectations. And one more thing that I just want to give you is sort of a thing to keep in mind. I apologize for this graphic. This graphic was my idea. It's a terrible way to represent this, so we're working on another way to do it. But this is this represents a whole area of organizational behavior research called job demands resources theory. It's not really a theory. It's got 30 years worth of work behind it. What the scientists did was they put forth this idea of resourcing people, that when people have the resources both within themselves and within the organization that they need to be successful in all areas, right? Their work, their careers, and their personal lives, that's where things start to matter. And they've identified these resources as being the ones that matter the most statistically. So what we have is a couple of categories of five categories of resources. One of them, though, only one of them is within the employee's individual control, and that's their personal resources, right? So how flexible they are, whether or not they tend to be an optimist or a pessimist. Do they feel efficacious in their work? Do they feel like they're good at what they do? Are they resilient? Are they able to go through trials and tribulations and maintain a sense of self? Do they have a growth mindset, which is something we're going to talk about a little bit later? Are they proactive in nature? Do they take good care of themselves physically and emotionally, right? All these things. Those are, people who score really high on all these dimensions are what we describe as people who have high personal resources, right? And of course, those are the people that we're trying to hire. Everybody's trying to hire them. But all of us have the ability to increase our resources here and do more. But that's really what's in our control. These other things are really not in our control. To some extent, they might be, but they're really not. They're within the organization's control. And this is what employee experience is really all about, is making sure that these resources are deep, right? That we have good resources here for people. And they fall into four categories. First is social. Recognition we've already talked about. Do I feel uniquely seen and valued for who I am and what I contribute to the organization? That's a big one. Do I work for a manager that I consider to be supportive of me personally, right? Are they supportive of me? Do I have good support from the members of my team? Do I work in a team that has a good environment, a good atmosphere? Do I work as part of a team that's pretty effective at what we do? And is there good clarity about our roles and what's most important to work on? This idea of role clarity and goal clarity. Secondly, for the work resources, do I have a lot of autonomy? Do I have a lot of control over the job? Am I a good fit for it? Do I have a lot of variety in the tasks that I do? Do I have the tools and information that I need available close at hand to be successful? Do I know where to find those things? Do I get to participate in decisions that are going to affect me? And is it a good use of my skills? And then there's organizational resources, really important. Do I trust the leadership here? Do I feel alignment with the mission and purpose of the company? Do I feel alignment with the values of the organization? Am I paid fairly? Is the leadership team engaged? Is there a sense of fairness, organizational justice? What happens to jerks, right? How do I feel about the communications of the organization of leaders? Is there availability of good information? And then finally, developmental resources. Do I get good feedback about the way I'm performing? Do I have opportunities to have good, candid, but constructive feedback? Do I have opportunities to learn and grow? And is somebody talking with me regularly about my career and opportunities there, right? So these are the kinds of resources that really matter. I've worked for organizations in the past. I worked for a general manager, right, whose idea of management was, I'm thinking of a number. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but if you get it wrong, you're probably not going to be here in a year. That's not good management, right? Didn't have good clarity about the role and the goal or anything else. And so he also thought in terms of resources being money. We're just going to allocate money and then people will go figure it out and get it done. It doesn't work that way, right? We have to think about resources a little bit more holistically than that. And so anyway, that's where some of the seeds of this research really began for me. But we're all facing different kinds of demands in our work. Going back to the airline example for a moment, flight attendants have a huge emotional demand on them, and as they do their work. Passengers can really be difficult when they're traveling. And a flight attendant may have to show one emotion while feeling something completely different. They may feel like they want to punch the passenger in the face rather than help them with their bag, but they've got to smile and say, "I'm sorry, sir, I'll help you with your bag." So that's an emotionally demanding job. And supporting people with emotional resources means, let's in Southwest Airlines example, if they had somebody that was going through a divorce or going through a death in the family or something like that, they made sure that that person not only had time off, but also either had an attorney or a therapist assigned to them from the company that would help them get through that, right? Because they wanted to make sure that that was going to be as minimally impactful emotionally on them as possible so that they'd be able to come back to work quicker. And when they did, they'd be in a better place. So it was about supporting them, realizing they had an emotionally demanding job, and supporting them that way. So I'm going to pause before I transition into the growth mindset part of the discussion. Any questions here? Anything that you disagree with? Anything that stands out for you as resonating well?
Thank you, David. So a few reactions in the chat. Sounds like you've had a few bad experiences yourself, so I think you might need a hug. But also grateful that that triggered some of the research that
I
you
love that.
embarked on. So people are wondering if you can make a copy of the presentation available to us after the event. We'll be happy to distribute if you can.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another point that was made in the chat is that we're talking about EX, which stands for employee experience.
Yeah.
But we also use within the federal public service and perhaps elsewhere, EX as a label for the executive group.
Ah, got it. Yeah. Okay, I understand the confusion there.
No, it's not necessarily confusion. Is can you speak to the linkages? Can you speak to some that it might just look like a weird universal way to kind of poke fun at us, but is there an implicit, explicit role? And you're talking a lot about human management and being available and recognizing human potential. And what is the explicit role or expectation of leadership there?
Yeah. So leaders that's a great question. And leaders have a really tough role, because you're on one hand managing expectations from above you, but you're also managing the expectations of people, and you probably can't satisfy everybody, right? So there's that. But there are certain leadership qualities, and my colleague James McQuivey, who is also my boss, which is a good thing, has written extensively about leadership, as has Katie Tynan, and the qualities of a great leader, and what we recommend, as a research firm to our clients in that area. So a lot of things, like a lot of words like empathy come up, and I mentioned earlier, like Colleen Barrett, this idea that having a great deal of empathy and compassion and a listening ear for your people is not incompatible with having high expectations for how they show up, right, in their performance. And sort of, it's like the brick covered in velvet, analogy. But the extent that you can give people, help. First of all, the most important thing, as far as leadership goes for employee experience, is understanding what's most important to your people. If you know what really everybody on your team is really hoping to achieve in their work and hoping to achieve in their personal lives and their careers, if you can help them along that path as much as their work roles will allow, and maybe give them opportunities to work on things that might be outside of their work roles, that's one of the most important things that you can do, is because you're aligning much more with their intrinsic motivation, the things that they want to work on, and that will have usually a spillover effect into their normal daily work as well. But there's a lot in this particular slide for leaders, recognizing people, and being specific in the recognition that you give. Hey, I see you. It's like specific, time relevant, all those things. I was like you could say things like, I was in a call yesterday, and you didn't know that I was there, but I heard you speaking with with a citizen, and you did a beautiful job of the way you just handled that person who was a difficult personality. You killed it. Or I heard through the grapevine that you did this and this and this. I just want you to know that I appreciate it, and I see you. And that's the kind of thing that people will carry home with them. They'll tell their spouses about it, right? It seems like such a small thing, and we don't really forget to do it, especially us as managers. We're probably feeling the effects of burnout. Sometimes the last thing we feel like doing is giving to somebody else when we're feeling low, right? But yet it's the best thing that you can do. You actually feel better once you do that, right? It actually uplifts you when you take an opportunity to recognize somebody else. And it's not hollow. It's, legitimate, genuine things that you really are calling people out for. Boy, does that do a lot to change the dynamic and the motivation of a group of people. So people feeling like you're supportive of them, being careful not to play favorites, and being supportive of everybody as equally as you can be, helping people feel included. This is why the inclusivity research and equity, diversity, and inclusion is so good for organizational outcomes. People want to contribute when they feel like their contributions are going to be valued and that they do have an equal opportunity to contribute in important ways. So I'm married to a psychologist, and she heads up the equity and diversity and inclusion team where she works, council. And she's seen the outcomes of this firsthand. We talk about this often. But anyway, those are the kinds of things as a leader are really powerful. But yet you also have to be clear. You have to be clear with people if they are really struggling, and they're not necessarily doing what's really most important. It means having an honest conversation about it, and wading into difficult conversations, which is something most of us as managers will avoid. It's like, oh, it feels icky. I don't want to do that. I don't want to, demotivate this person. You have to, but you can do it with care and compassion when you do. And so that's another piece that I would give. This could fill a book, but the employee experience implications for being a great manager are profound. One of the researchers here, he's the chief scientist at Gallup, James Harder, wrote a book called "It's the Manager," that really goes into all that they've learned about manager behaviors through their statistics, analysis, and work that they've done with companies and government organizations. So, a good book to read.
Gotcha. Lots of homework to do. So we have another question I want to get to
Yeah,
around virtual
sure.
work, because it's in the news here that a lot of the federal public service will be mandated to go back to the workplace, the physical workplace. But before I jump to that question, I'll let Madame Fraser um, take the stand. Liana.
Yeah, thanks. You mentioned managers a few times, so I kind of wanted to jump on that for a moment and maybe not so much pose a question, but maybe a prompt to speak a little bit more. We're talking about employee experience in the federal public service, that
Yeah,
first level of supervisor and even that first level of manager. We have a really big workforce of supervisors and managers.
yeah,
And when you're talking about the key to engagement in knowledge workers is the ability to self-regulate,
yeah,
keep their attention, you're talking about flow. That I can see a path for that for those that have really deep work in that field.
yeah.
What I really struggle with is what that looks like for the first level of supervisors and the first level of managers. Like as a manager, I dream of flow. I can't even imagine what that looks like because we're all ping-ponging between quick hits. Like I don't have a lot of deep work, or like in the sense that I'm diving into a project for hours and hours. So maybe really quickly, mindful of time, do you have you seen really places where the supervisors and managers can get into flow and really manage their time wisely and can feel engaged?
Yeah, so that's a really nice lead into the second part of our discussion. So, yes, short answer is yes. Look at a busy restaurant sometime, right? I would not call servers knowledge workers, although on one hand they are. I mean, it's a much more uh, task-driven type of role, right? But yeah, you see people who are really good at it and they get in the zone and they're just doing their thing. They're really efficient and effective. And so they have something different about their mindset, and they have something different about the way that they frame their attitude and mindset toward the work. That's important to sort of notice, and that's what's going to get us into the growth mindset discussion here. But I see this in call centers. I see this in factory floors. I did a exercise with a company that makes forklifts, and people on the factory floor getting into the zone. And there are periods in their day that were just particularly stressful. And so the thing that the organization was doing was trying to figure out how to get the worst part of that stress out of their purview, and so that they could work a little bit more effectively. So there's likely a personal component here as well as an organizational one. I'd love to talk more about the specifics around the roles that you're thinking about. We could probably brainstorm some ideas, but in any case, it's a combination of those two things. Their overall organization's experience and their mindset toward it.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
And before we move on to the next section, I just want to address some with a comment that was made in the chat around the research and the examples that are provided. They're about employees working in the office or in an actual physical workplace. Did you compare with virtual workplaces?
We did. Yeah, we did. So hybrid work is a special case. A lot of the same principles apply, but the social connection matters a lot more. Most of what we feel when we're working remotely is a depletion of our networks, right? A depletion of some of that social connective tissue that we're used to in working in the office, right? When we did the research around this, we talked to some professors, but we also talked to some organizations who have been doing remote and hybrid work for a long time, and found ways to make it really successful. Understanding, though, that you have people who are going to be asked to come back to the office who may not be feeling like they want to, or that they're ready to, or that they won't even be as productive in the office. That's something to be careful with. Something to be careful with in terms of, is there some flexibility that you can give them that was greater than what you had before the pandemic, but yet also honors the value of in-person work, which is important too. So we could talk about that in a little more detail, and I've got really some specifics from that research we could talk about, but I hadn't planned to go into depth on that one in this discussion.
All good. Carry
Okay.
on, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. So let's talk about growth mindset for a second. Excuse me. What do we mean? Growth mindset is the belief that you can cultivate and improve upon your abilities through practice and effort. That what we can do, what we're capable of, is not fixed. I have an 11-year-old daughter, and she says things like, "I'm not good in math." Neither my wife and I will accept that answer. It's like, well, you may not feel that you're very good in math, but I guarantee with a little practice and a little bit more work, you could be pretty good in math, probably better than most people in math. So that's really not a limitation for you in the way that you think it is, right? So we work with her in that kind of way and try and coach her in that. And the same is true for all of us, right? We all feel like we have some limitations. Like, I'm not organized, or I have a hard time getting this type of work done, or I need to have, a 3-hour block before I can get any writing done. Well, it may feel that way, but it's actually not true, right? So there are some realities in terms of what we perceive of ourselves and what is reality in terms of what we're capable of, and being open to that, softening to the possibilities that we can do more and work and work better and more effectively than we ever have. Super important. I'm in the process of doing a round of edits on a book written by a mentor of mine in this research. There's a guy named Stefan Falk. He's from Sweden, and he has spent his entire career as either an executive working as a COO or a CFO for various companies like Green Cargo and Ericsson, or also most recently has been coaching consultants at McKinsey about how to do the job that takes most people 80 hours a week, how to get it done in 30 or 40. And so he's really good at this, and really good at coaching, and really good at helping people develop a growth mindset and shifting their perspective of their work. So anyway, he's written a book. It's been picked up by a major publisher, and so our CEO has written one of the forewords of that book, and then I am also completing a round of edits, and we'll be continuing to work with Stefan, with this work. But it's about this idea of growth mindset and a whole bunch of tips and tricks and things that you can use to be more effective and to cultivate this in the organization. So without further ado, let me dig in. Some of the things that we might say to ourselves and to others with a fixed mindset is, what I'm doing or my current level of performance is the limit of my abilities, or I'm either good at it or I'm not, or I don't like to be challenged. It's painful, or my potential is already predetermined. I'm not going to be able to do any better, and when I'm frustrated, I give up. But people that have a growth mindset really frame things differently. They see failure as an opportunity to grow. They like to try new things. They find feedback to be constructive. They just have a different way that their mind works relative to things. And they're the kind of people you want to work with, usually. Most of us probably know people who have a really good growth mindset, and most of us would prefer to work with people like that than people who don't share that set of qualities. And so, uh, you know, this may sound like sunshine that I'm blowing toward you, and that's not my intention. I get it that it may seem that way, but really, what it comes down to is happiness. How do you want to spend your time? How do you want to spend your days? Do you want to spend them feeling, kind of unhappy and disgruntled and dissatisfied with your work, or do you want to feel happy? And do you want to feel like no matter what you're doing, it's good? You know, and that you can do it and you can do it well. So that's sort of the essence of this and how it kind of plays out. And I've seen both. I've worked with people that I would say have an excellent growth mindset. For my own part, I was diagnosed with ADHD back in 2013, I think it was. And so the doctor that diagnosed me said, his quote to me was, "Not only do you have it, but you got one of the worst cases I've ever seen." Right. So he said, "I can't believe you've gotten as far as you have in your career." So I had a set of, medical or, psychological limitations that I didn't fully understand. So the journey for me to a growth mindset started with, okay, what's really going on here? And how do I make changes? What changes do I need to make to sort of get through this and learn to manage with this effectively? And that's been a practice for me now for the last 8 years. It involves meditation, it involves all kinds of things, some medication, but it's really helped me change the way that I think about work and the way that I respond to stressors and all kinds of things. So it can be done, and the important thing is wading into it and figuring out what's going on. You know, Children in general have fun at almost everything they do. Give a kid a stick and it will suddenly be an airplane, right? Or any one of a number of other things. Their imagination is enormous. I mentioned I have two kids, and watching them, especially when they were younger, just watching them just find endless fun doing all kinds of stuff. And you could say that maybe a lot of that joy and that sort of child mind gets crushed out of them by school and the realities of growing up. We're taught that certain things aren't fun. They're not supposed to be fun, but they should be. But anyway, children are really good at growth mindset for the most part. They haven't learned to think about limitations yet. The whole world's an open possibility. So I think studying kids and having the opportunity to be a parent has taught me a lot about growth mindset because it helped me remember what it was like to be a kid. And I think they would tell you that I'm a giant kid. So, but unlike kids, we as adults have to cultivate our curiosity and our ability to be fully engaged in what we're doing. And that requires effort and deliberate uh, thinking and repetitive ways of working that really help cultivate that. I've observed people over the years who um, they just sort of start to feel disengaged after a while. And, then maybe they've been doing the same job for a long period of time. And they start just sort of turning the crank. I mean, they get good at it. They got good at it, and they're able to continue doing it. But it ceases to be a source of inspiration for them. It ceases to be a source of learning and of joy and other things. And over time, they just get less and less competent as a result. They're still able to do the job, but not as effectively as when they were learning to do it and early on when they were doing it. So how do we do that? How do we as people cultivate that desire for continued learning and growth in our daily work when we don't feel like it's changing all that much? That's the only thing that we can really control. We may feel like it's not, we don't want to do that our organization doesn't deserve it or our boss doesn't deserve it, but that's our own self-talk, right? That's in our heads. And so, for me, it's been a journey of growth and learning to learn how to do this and to feel, good about it, whatever work I'm involved in. So, you know, one of the tips that I give individual contributors and managers alike, some of the tips that I give them is, first of all, put everything in your calendar. Develop some habits that will make it easier for your brain to stay more available and not feel burned out. One of the people I interviewed for this research is a guy named David Rock. He wrote a book called Your Brain at Work. He's also the founder of the Neuro Leadership Institute. And we all have biological limits in our brain, right? So all of us start each day with a limited amount of what the scientists call cognitive fuel. It's glucose, which means there are certain, that's the energy that our brain uses to function. There are certain activities that burn an enormous amount of glucose. One of them is, like, let's say, for example, you do email first thing in the morning. The first thing you do when you get out of bed and think about working, if you're working remotely, you go into the office, is you look at your email. Well, all of us only have maybe 6 or 7 things that we can keep in our conscious mind at any given time. When we check our email, we probably just filled up all those 6 or 7 things in our brain. Now, if we want to focus on something else and try and get that done, we got to switch one thing out, put something else in there. Turns out that burns a lot of glucose, right? That burns a lot of cognitive fuel. That's the kind of stuff that depletes our brain, whether we realize that we're doing it or not. Just bad habits. So putting things in your calendar, taking time at the beginning of the day to be thinking about any work-related tasks that you know that you need to pursue on that day, put it in the calendar, leave space for it. Anything you think you're going to need to do, and any work-related idea you think you need to pursue, maybe it's just something that you want to put a placeholder in to think about, put it on the calendar. And every private and personal task you think you should pursue, put it in the calendar. That way there's a placeholder for it. You get it out of your brain. Your brain doesn't have to hold on to that anymore. The calendar will. It frees up your time, frees up your energy for being able to focus on other things. And even do things like schedule time to feel angry, right? Somebody ticks you off, you're upset about a thing. Don't worry about it right now. Put some time in the calendar to feel bad about it later, and it will release your brain from having to carry that for a while. You'd be surprised how well this works, right? This basic habit of putting everything in a calendar at the start of every day. Also, perform simple tasks right away. So let's say you're in a meeting and decide that another meeting is required. Go ahead and schedule it right away. Don't put it off and say you're going to do it later, because then your brain has to try and hang on to that and try and remember. It's going to keep that and keep having to tickle you to remember. Do it right away. If someone calls or emails you a request for some information, send it right away, as long as it's available to you and you can do it quickly. If your task is coming back to a simple suggestion or answer to a question, do it right away. What we're doing here is systematically ending procrastination on small stuff in order to focus on something big. Actually, do the small stuff first, and you'll be able to focus on something bigger. But the most important insight in all of this is developing a mindset of excitement and outcome focus. Get excited about how this is going to contribute to people you work with lives, citizens' lives, right? Getting excited about the outcomes of whatever it is that you're working on. You may have every reason to feel it's mundane and it doesn't matter. Don't do that, right? Focus on what's going to be really good about the outcomes of this versus worrying about the activities. Think about the outcomes. Keep your mind focused on what's coming that this will do. And it also comes from developing the habit of always identifying these exciting outcomes for the things we have to do and making concrete plans to achieve them. You're basically conditioning your brain to be excited about the work that you're doing every day. And this is a process. This is a learning process, and it works really well. Think about what makes a work activity lovable. And that really is how we think about it. How we think about the next call that we have to take, or how we think about the next email we have to do, or the next slide deck we have to produce. We have an opportunity to interrupt, that process, maybe in not being on autopilot, right? And think differently about it. We have that power. Fantasizing about becoming the most admired manager in your organization. Keep your mind focused on those things that are really good outcomes and what that would look and feel like, and things will start to fall into place. I know this sounds like woo-woo. Believe me, it works. And some traits that we find that people with a growth mindset have. Boring is not in their vocabulary. It just isn't there. No task is boring. And I know this sounds silly, but it's just not. And they get endless energy from their everyday learning and development. Their daily development goals are concrete and they're balanced. Again, outcomes. And they can instantly judge what's really important here and now, and what's not. That's something that's really important, so you don't get bogged down by the stuff that doesn't really matter as much as other things. They would also say things like they trust themselves, but they wouldn't call it self-confidence. It means that they're not overconfident, but they still have faith in themselves. They still trust themselves to get things done. That's really important, and you'll develop more of that over time. And that their personal goal is to continue to experience their life and their work as fulfilling. And again, this goes back to how we frame things every day. This is the piece that's within our control. So how do we do that? You can feel passionate about creating a beautiful end product if you're working on a project. You can look at shortfalls and meeting your own expectations with curiosity, like, hey, I didn't do that well. This didn't feel that good to me. Why is that? Just looking at it with curiosity, and thinking about how to have the best emotional experience you can have while doing any task that you choose to. You have to celebrate progress with your own learning and growth as you continue to make strides. Celebrate that, and look to your colleagues and coworkers not as competitors, but as sources of inspiration. When we start to feel like we're competing with people around us, it really sets up a negative process in our brains, right? So we want to look at them as sources of inspiration and not competitors, and that'll change the way that we think about them and think about our work. So this is a lot here. I know that I'm sending a lot of you because we don't have that much time left in the session, but we'll share the slides with you, and I'll keep, follow my blog. I'll be writing about the book when it's published from Stefan, and there's a lot of really good practical tips in there. And as a manager, really important to be specific, be really clear and specific with problems that you define, and things that need to be done. For people need that kind of clarity. You almost can't be too clear. And there's a line here between micromanaging, right, and giving people clarity. You don't want to micromanage. You just want to give people clarity. But you want to also logically disaggregate problems into things that can be managed, and then create a story. Make a work plan, educate and convince people to commit to doing their part of it. And that leads to what I call managing by agreement. As a manager, it's really the most effective tool to manage by agreement. Come to agreement with everybody on your team in your one-on-ones about what they can achieve, and have that be reasonable. No more than 2 or 3 things any given week that you talk about that are most important to get done. So really important. And then that's managing by agreement rather than by directive. So, how do you handle it when people are struggling? Try to get that person to engage and trying to figure out what's holding them back. Try to get them to sort of, what's going on for you? How are you, what's holding you back? And communicate with compassion and care. Make employee reviews an enjoyable experience for them, not one where they feel threatened. And commit to doing 1 or 2 things that will help them with whatever circumstances they feel are holding them back. So those are the best pieces of advice that I can give individual managers. And happy to have more conversations about this, and we'll share the deck afterwards. But hope this is helpful. And I know we're down to the last minute. Any questions? Anything that anyone wants to raise?
Thank you, David. And I remember when we first had this session, it was actually a few hours over several days. So
Yeah.
definitely lots of material to kind of boil down to an hour. So thank you. Thank you for this.
Yeah,
I have a few questions in the chat. If we have people want to stick around for a few minutes, do you have any personal resources or quizzes for employees?
Quizzes. So things that you'd quiz them on during a one-on-one meeting, something like that.
If the person is still online and wants to elaborate on that, it was during the first part of the presentation, so a
Yeah.
while back.
Okay. I don't really have any quizzes. I do have guidance for conversations to have in one-on-ones with employees and at review time, right? Things to talk about, things to focus on. I do have some checklists for things like that I just keep,
Oh,
for yeah.
thank you. Now, related to that, what are some of your thoughts on special awards, Employee of the Year Award, Manager of the Year Award? Beneficial, yay, nay?
Anything like that's always going to be beneficial. But, I would say that they're not as powerful as really individualized, specific recognition. the examples I gave earlier. I've seen examples of even handwritten notes from senior executives given to individual employees that say, "Hey, this is," and they'll take they receive the note, and again they'll take it home. They'll share it with their friends and colleagues, and so, it's one of those things that just gives them a huge boost. And that's the best kind. But there's other things, recognition, awards, and so on for annual service awards, all fine and good, but not as powerful, in my opinion, as the specific feedback like that.
True. And a nerdy question, what's your go-to resource for statistics?
Oh, Forrester's data.
Yes.
We're lucky,
Of
though.
course.
I mean, I work for a firm that's got some of the best data in the world, right? So we have a rich trove of data. But I also looked at other resources. Society of Human Resource Managers really is a great resource for data. Anything that's an independent source. Vendors sometimes will have institutes that have good data. You have to wade through that carefully because sometimes it's going to stack in favor of what they sell. But there's a lot of good sources out there, and I use a lot of data sources. Government agencies also, like the U.S. federal government, U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, really good source of data. So,
And the same in
yeah,
Canada,
yeah,
Statistics Canada. Whole
yeah,
wealth of resources, especially for us who are working in human resources. The PSC has a lot.
yeah.
So thank you again for your time. This has been wonderful, really appreciated by everyone who participated. Lots of love in the chat. So thank you, and take that with you over the holidays.
Thank you.
Thank you again, audience members, for being here. This was our last HR La Carte for 2022, and we will see you all next year.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thanks.
everybody.
Bye.
Happy
Be
holidays.
safe.
Yes.